This really should be something that somebody can digest in between the time they take it out of the mailbox and the time they walk over to that recycling bin or that trash can in their garage. I always say you want to make it past the first sort. You want to get past the garage. You want to get into the home office or into the kitchen table.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, an investment fund and incubator for Republican campaign technology. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, we bring you into conversation with the entrepreneurs who build best-in-class political businesses, the funders who provide the capital, and the operatives who put it all together to win campaigns. We are joined today by Chris Faulkner, who is a senior national strategist at Majority Strategies, one of the biggest consulting firms in the political space. Chris spent almost a decade as a Marine before getting into politics, and he has worked on a lot of campaigns. In this episode, you're going to get an inside look at the nuts and bolts of direct mail in politics. Chris, we have a lot of people on this podcast talking about the latest cutting-edge campaign technology, but obviously mail continues to be a big part of campaigning. Give us a sense of what role mail plays in campaigns in 2022.
Sure. Mail and, printed leaflets, materials, things like that are certainly one of the oldest forms of campaigning. In my collection of political memorabilia, I've actually got some, the reproductions, obviously, but some of the flyers that Jefferson and Adams used to use against each other when they were printed by the parties. And they're just as unflattering, if not more so, than some see in mailboxes today. It's pretty entertaining. I started working in campaigns in 1996, started, consulting shortly thereafter and doing mail for candidates. And pretty much every cycle since 2000, you always hear, well, this is it for direct mail. Direct mail is going to go away because, well, we have digital now and Facebook and Twitter, and we have all these different social media platforms. And, the post office keeps raising postage and making mail more expensive. But for a number of reasons, mail continues to be still a very valuable tool kind of in the toolbox in terms of direct persuasion or communications with individual voters.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating because it's not going away because of how reliable it is in reaching voters, and everyone has a mailbox, right? So obviously it maintains its role, but it certainly hasn't stagnated since 1996. How has mail changed with new technology in the political space?
We've seen a number of changes that have, I think, enhanced the use of mail. If anything, digital advertising makes direct mail even better. Not because digital advertising is bad, just because like all these different mediums, I always tell my clients and folks that I work with, my firm does digital advertising as well. And I would tell people I'm relatively agnostic about how we're directly communicating with voters, as long as it's the right message to the right person at the right time. And depending on what that audience would be, sometimes that is a mailbox and sometimes it's a OTT ad and sometimes it's a candidate knocking on the door, just would all depend. And I would posit that no matter where you are in the country or what you're running for, the best one of those is a combination of all of them, multiple touches and multiple different mediums. There's been a number of things I think that have made mail more interesting here just in the last couple of cycles. And particularly it is the notion that, younger voters don't read their mail, or that we should send more mail to older voters simply because they read their mail. And obviously stereotypes sometimes definitely exist for a reason or because there is some truth to it. What we've seen, and the last time I was involved like an academic research project around this was 2015, 2016. But I've been really fortunate to work with a number of academics that are trying to do like peer review testing to actually get a sense, get past the anecdotal and really dig down and see what works and what doesn't. And the findings we had from a study we did in 2016 were actually pretty fascinating. It's almost inverse. The direct mail that we used on younger, and I say younger, voters under the age of 35 actually had a better recall rate than older voters. And when we got those results, everybody was really confused because it was kind of like not the conventional wisdom. But the more we dug into it and discussed it, the more it made sense. I'm just turned 49 this year, and I get a lot of mail, as you might imagine. I love to put myself on mailing lists and steal other people's good ideas, whether they be political or not. And so I get a lot of dead trees in the mailbox every day. And my kids are 22, 20, and 19. And I would tell you, they don't get very much mail, but the mail they do get, they actually read it. Everything, even the garbage, they're like, oh, wow, what does AT&T want to say to me? Because there's a piece of paper with my name on it. And so they're
That's
actually more.
fascinating.
Yeah. And again, it kind of goes against that conventional wisdom. Now, the challenge, though, with voters under the age of 35, especially if they're not married or if they're not homeowners, is they tend not to check their mail every day. It's one of those, once, twice, maybe 3 times a week type things. U.S. Postal Service continues to try and reach folks in different ways. Informed delivery is something that I personally use at home.
It's my favorite thing that they've done in decades.
It really is. It's great. And there are options where you can have like a digital link, and basically informed delivery is just for everyone that's listening. It's an email you get in the morning that is a simple scan of everything you're going to get in the mail that day, as well as notices and links on packages and tracking. I want to say it's free or darn near free.
Yeah, it's free. You just sign up and link an email.
Give them an email address associated with your mailing address, and you get this email every morning, and it just tells you what's coming in the mailbox. And it's super helpful in terms of making sure, especially like in my family is a good example. We kind of a mixed household. We have my in-laws live on the same property with us, and then I have 3 adult children, and plus my wife and I. And so, 7 different people getting Amazon packages and pieces of mail. And so when I get that email, it's my way of making sure, candidly, that if there was something in the mail that I cared about or was interested in, to make sure that I actually get to see it. And for my kids, the older 2 are both actors. And so they've been in, 15 different episodes of different shows that you may have heard of before. Sadly, I still have to work. I was really hoping to be a drunk celebrity parent at this point in my life.
but those residual checks still help.
They do. And what's funny is, as much as the entertainment industry has changed so dramatically with streaming services, the way they pay actors and people in the industry is still a hard check in the mail. And my oldest actually recently just moved out, took a job down at Disney World. And as he's cleaning his room out, we came across all these checks. And they're for 37 cents, $1.25. And I'm like, dude, all you got to do is scan it on your app on your phone. It's not that big of a deal. But anyway, the point being that younger voters actually do read their mail. Older voters still do read their mail. But COVID has changed dramatically the way that people use QR codes. The first time I actually pitched a candidate on QR codes was a mayoral race back in 2000, I want to say 11. And let's just say I was way ahead of myself there in terms of adaptation and people actually using those. I've had a number of clients where we've used QR codes for engagement on mail pieces. And I would tell you that the response rates, as you might imagine, are really, really low in terms of people clicking through and maybe going to a landing page or anything like that. And when I say really low, I'm talking less than 1%. However, there is value in that. And even if it's not a QR code, I pretty much always recommend that campaigns have some sort of digital voicemail box or kind of an inbox for incoming text messages or things like that. And every campaign that I can convince to do it, I tell them, and there's obviously a number of services you can use to set this up, but you just get a local number and you put it on the mail piece. A good example of this would be Charlie Baker back in 2018 when he was running for re-election. We got a local Boston number and we used basically like a digital voicemail, except it was also able to receive incoming text messages. And so we put that on all the mailings and, like I said, the handouts. And we just said, hey, you have a question for Charlie, text us at whatever. As you might imagine, we may have gotten a few photos and comments that were not complimentary.
Were you in charge of checking that inbox?
Thankfully, no. They had some very well-qualified interns from Harvard who got to view those great statements from great Americans. But surprisingly, I would say most, over half of the feedback we got was relatively positive. And it was easy to answer and easy to help people that had questions like, hey, can I get a yard sign? Does Charlie have a position on the upcoming metro expansion or something like that? And so I'm not saying it's a great fit for every campaign, but it was I want to say low barrier of entry. People didn't feel like they had to, call and ask somebody. It was just a quick text. And then that led into a whole GeoTV program where we would ask people and say, hey, you want a GeoTV reminder, day before election day or something like that. We try not to blow up their inbox too much. Charlie was way ahead. So, we didn't have to we didn't have to do as much to win that election. But anything you can do to improve the interactivity between the voter and using the mail piece, I think is just pretty much always a net win.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important lesson that we hear again and again from guests is it's not about either or, it's both and, to really make sure that you're coordinating across all of these different verticals. Don't silo your voter contact in any one place. And to your credit, has taken a new generation of operative who sees past just I'm the mail guy and all that I do is mail and coordinating with other aspects of the campaign. So I think that's a really important lesson.
When I talk to candidates, I tell them flat out, let me explain to you exactly how I make money. And most of them honestly are a little taken back at how direct that conversation is. But I said, if you're going to take my advice, I want you to understand that I'm not an activist. I'm not necessarily, a cold-blooded mercenary, but I am a business person and I am trying to make money from your campaign. And so I'm not going to try and snow you with some sort of, great American dream stuff. And so when I explain to them the way that I make the most money and that I'm successful is when you win. Because when you win, you're a repeat client, your referral business. And so when I explain it to them that way they actually believe me when I say that I'm relatively medium agnostic in terms of contacting voters just because I want to win.
So, Chris, the concept of micro-targeting political ads online certainly gets a lot of scrutiny. I think the stat is like 77% of Americans oppose using data to target ads on social media. And of course, we know that micro-targeting started out as a mail tactic. And I think in many ways, mail can be as sophisticated in the targeting, and it's not as widely seen as Facebook ads are now. Why do you think there's such a discrepancy between these attitudes towards mail targeting and digital targeting?
That's really a great question, Eric. And I'll be really blunt. It's laziness. It's laziness on people in my industry who don't want to do the logistical planning. And not just, I'm not going to hang this on consultants. It's also candidates in individual campaigns that, are, let's call it, somewhat chaotic in their planning and execution process. Putting together a micro-targeted mail plan that is addressing, let's call it for the sake of conversation, 5 different mailing universes, which of course there is some overlap and you want different messages to different universes. That's actually a logistical challenge for most campaigns to really be able to pull off, like, because, as the mail vendor, you're always like, all right, well, I need photos, guys. I need a high resolution photo, not the one you ripped off Facebook, but I need an actual good photo I can use for print quality. And then of course,
300 DPI. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I need some actual content. And so to come up with a mail plan like that, you're talking about, doing, like I said, 5 universes, and there probably is a bunch of overlap. You may do the whole district. You may do, just veterans or gun owners or something like that. And what ends up happening is you have this logistical exercise that a lot of campaigns, quite frankly, they fumble, and they end up wasting their micro-targeting dollars. And I've seen this over and over, and it's incredibly frustrating. Folks will spend, $25,000, $35,000, $50,000 on micro-targeting, and it'll be in a, we've advanced. It's not just sitting in a 3-ring binder anymore. It's in a PDF file, but then it kind of never gets reviewed. We do the initial conference call, but we don't actually make it actionable and weaponize it. And so the conversation around digital has always been about how specific we can make the targeting, and which has obviously changed here in the last couple of years, and how specific we can make that targeting as privacy concerns continue to, rightfully so, weigh in on the conversation. But with direct mail, as all of us know, the amount of personal information that is available about all of us out there is shockingly specific. And that allows us with mail, using, both political as well as consumer files, to really kind of get into the nitty gritty. Now, having said that, again, though, launching a Facebook ad versus launching a mail piece are 2 entirely different things. Getting a mail piece approved and then getting it printed, then of course you got to turn it over to the USPS, and then, does it take 3 days? Does it take 5 days? Does it take 7 days? There's no pat answer for any of that. It's all one of those, well, it all just depends. And so versus, hey, it's Tuesday, we have an idea for a Facebook ad. We put this together, we have some graphics, we get it approved, and 48 hours later, it's receiving traffic. It just, mail moves slower. And I think because of that logistical challenge, that's where a lot of campaigns kind of fumble the ball.
That's a really fascinating insight. And one thing that I often talk about as it pertains to email is that we can be a lot more like postal mail, where there's that expedited traffic and you do certainly get better rates as a candidate and things like that. So I do think that there hopefully will be continued cross-pollination between the two mediums. But help our listeners understand, where does mail fit in with other campaign tactics depending on the size of the race, right? I mean, is it the first in the door? Is it last in the door? Give us a sense of where it comes together, because obviously we all agree that needs to be part of a comprehensive strategy.
No, yeah, and again, that's a great question. Traditionally, I say traditionally is a nice way of saying in olden days, before campaigns were being more aggressive in their digital buys and their presence online. Mail was the way that we would usually talk to people in primaries. Well, let me take a step back. The media mix in terms of voter contact, the way that we allocate resources to mail or digital or television or other, often is a budgetary discussion. And so micro-targeting, its real value theoretically is putting a targeted message on a targeted group of voters. But its additional value is also from a budgetary standpoint. Instead of having to mail to a universe of 86,000 households, maybe you only got to mail to 24,000. And that same kind of math carries over, let's say, congressional races. Let's say that I'm working on a congressional race in Indiana 3. Indiana 3 is Fort Wayne. Pretty much the entire congressional district watches Fort Wayne television. And as you might imagine, Fort Wayne television is not super expensive. So therefore, getting the actual impressions, if your measurement for number of impressions and repetitions on a specific group of voters, if you're being smart about this and looking at it from a budgetary standpoint, you're going to say, oh, okay, well, maybe mail doesn't make as much sense here because I can obviously just buy a lot of TV relatively cheap and get cheap coverage. Whereas one of my races in, say, Southern California, Orange County, Los Angeles County, where you have, some of the most expensive media markets in the world, well, mail plays a much bigger role because people can't afford that TV. And so then when you enter digital into the mix, then it becomes a question of, oh, okay, well, digital is not that expensive in terms of number of impressions. And obviously impressions, whether it's mail or Facebook or pre-roll or whatever, it's not a one-to-one or apples to apples comparison. But again, it's usually a budgetary discussion of, we're going to have this part, and then we're going to assume that this group of voters is going to need a repetition. And so how can we utilize mail to, either follow on a message that is being delivered in a different medium, or basically to carry the message entirely. Sometimes you'll see campaigns who like, okay, we have something negative to say about our opponent, but we're too chicken to do it on television or a medium that people could maybe see and share quickly, but they're
Do it in the
fine
inbox or the mailbox. Yeah.
yeah. And so, that's always been a pretty traditional tactic and something we still see pretty regularly.
You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with Chris Faulkner of Majority Strategies about the absolutely fascinating world of political direct mail. Chris, I want you to share some of your secrets with our listeners. What are your go-to tips or strategies for creating an effective or memorable mail piece?
Oh, wow. This is, I wish I could get people to agree to this in writing before I work with them. Number one, just because, and I don't care what kind of iPhone you have or Samsung or whatever, just because you got a camera on your phone does not mean you are a photographer. Hire an actual photographer, take real photos with real lighting and real locations. The photos I get of the candidates standing next to their fridge in the kitchen and that kind of stuff, it's just, why would you want to spend money with a photo that is not complimentary of you? It seems to be a relatively easy thing for everybody to agree on. But again, the logistics always trip up a lot of campaigns. Good photos. That's my long way of saying good photos.
And I'll echo that from the digital side, right? Because we need it for
absolutely.
everything. Social media, for your website. Yeah. So do everyone a favor and schedule that. Honestly, a full day photo shoot is what I would go with.
Just suck it up, go to the department store or the mall or whatever, get an actual professional photo done. Or, if budget allows, then yeah, absolutely get a photog to come out on location and take some good photos. Number two, I would say, is you don't have to say everything. White space is your friend. If you are trying to squeeze in one more bullet point, you're doing it wrong. The reality is, everyone should accept this, that really only your mom and maybe a couple of close friends actually are going to read your entire mail piece. Most people don't really care about your 27-point plan to reshape local government. Stick to some bullet points and then always direct them to your website. Always have social media links. Try and find some level of interactivity, whether it's a QR code or a text message, or there's lots of different fun things you can do to try and get people to interact with you through the mail. One of the other benefits of the interactivity, quite frankly, is kind of from an intelligence collection standpoint. If you're doing mail for like a statewide race, or let's say a congressional district that has a mixed rural urban population, there oftentimes will be delay in delivery between an urban and a rural population, with the urban population getting their mail a day before, sometimes 2 or 3 days before, a more rural address. So when we start getting incoming text messages or emails, or whatever you're getting in terms of interactivity from your mail piece, from a mail vendor standpoint, one of the worst conversations are always those ones right before election day, and you get those frantic phone calls. My opponent's mail piece is hitting, but we haven't seen ours. My brother's cousin's sister's uncle says that the guy who works at the post office is trying to hose us, and he lost a skid. All of these conspiracy theories are really not helpful. And so to cut some of that noise out, adding an interactivity from your mail piece, and again, whether it's text, email, or otherwise, when people start responding to you, at the very least, that at least the mail is hitting.
Right. Yeah. And it just validates. It may not be a huge response rate, but clearly someone saw it.
So, good photos and interactivity, a call to action. And then I would also say too, just, the white space is your friend. Don't try and overfill everything. And really don't be afraid of repetition, whether it's your name or the particular issue. It doesn't have to be a policy paper, right? We're not sending people, your doctoral thesis. This really should be something that somebody can digest in between the time they take it out of the mailbox and the time they walk over to that recycling bin or that trash can in their garage. I always say you want to make it past the first sort, right? You want to get past the garage. You want to get into the home office or into the kitchen table.
Or in my case, to stay on the kitchen table for weeks on end.
Yeah. Or, even better, if it ends up on the fridge next to Junior's artwork, then, that's a home run.
Chris, it's clear from our conversation that mail continues to be a workhorse on campaigns. So, fundraising, persuasion, turnout. And even though it's not as flashy as some of the other disciplines within the profession, what do you think the outlook is for the next decade or so with mail?
That's a great question. What is mail going to look like in campaigns 10 years from now? And if you would have asked me in 2012 what mail was going to look like in 2022, I probably would have been wrong then. But I increasingly believe that there is going to be some sort of commercial alternative to USPS. And, so far, whether it's Amazon or UPS or whatever, I think they've avoided most of the letter mail type commercial stuff simply because it's obviously not as profitable as package delivery. But somebody's going to get involved in that and do a better job. Somebody's going to figure that out. I believe in the marketplace of innovation. I believe somebody's going to figure that out. And mail is going to continue to be part of the process because it's not going to get priced out. Whether they continue to increase postage rates and things like that, people generally still have, and honestly, thanks to Amazon, thank God for them, right? They make everybody excited to go check
the postal service. Yeah.
Right. And if I could just get a couple rolls of that Amazon Prime tape, I'd get 100% open rates on all my political mail. But until
and a stern cease and desist letter.
Yes, I'm sure. Very ugly visit in my home. But, it largely, I see it continuing to play a pretty large role simply because, our daily mail, and whether it's a cultural or societal thing, it's still a big part of our lives. And the way that we now get, whether it's our contact lenses or our groceries or, whatever that we're getting through the mail or delivered to us in person, I still think that is a very highly targetable way to contact voters. And when highly targetable, you should also read into that efficient in terms of budget. I don't know what changes are coming down the pipe, in terms of what we see on cell phones and on devices in terms of digital advertising. But, we still have a pretty clear lane in mail in terms of knowing your age, your gender, and, your subscription history and all that kind of stuff. And so it continues, I think, to be very successful in our ability to really target folks.
Right. And voting by mail is only becoming more widely used. And so that is
Yeah,
the battleground for campaigns.
100%. I live in California. We're a vote by mail state, and this whole idea that there is an election day really in of itself is kind of a false narrative. It's election month, right? Or 2 weeks, depending on what state you're in. But the early vote and the vote by mail options that are readily available to so many voters, what we see is that once people vote early or vote in person or vote through the mail, they tend not to go back to voting in person. There tends to be only an increase, and once they start doing it, they tend to repeat that particular form of behavior. Now, I wouldn't say it's a challenge. I call it an opportunity for campaigns and for whoever they're working with for direct mail. It's an opportunity to save money too. When you're doing that mail piece in the last 2 weeks, depending on what state you're in, you may have 20 or 30% of the ballots that are already in. So if you're being responsible, you're bouncing those lists and making sure that you're removing voters that have already cast ballots. Because again, why would you want to mail the 80,000 instead of 50,000 unless you were an evil direct mail vendor and just in it for the money, right? It's just responsible targeting. And so that vote by mail process offers yet another way in which you can be really efficient with your advertising through direct mail.
And your observation about QR codes on mail pieces gets me thinking about, what's the other sort of tech that's bridging offline to online. And I really am excited about the possibility of mail becoming a platform for more engagement, interactivity, digital coordination with campaigns. So things like augmented reality, right? We really haven't seen much of that beyond kind of gimmicks, but imagine a mail piece that puts the candidate in your living room. Imagine near field communication. It's just so easy now to put these NFC tags on things. And again, it's going to take some adoption on the consumer side, right? We saw, thanks to COVID, that QR codes got probably a decade worth of adoption in a matter of months. And so that's kind of what I'm excited about as well, because mail-in campaigns is not going anywhere.
No, especially further down the ballot. And again, your point about the vote by mail is absolutely accurate in terms of, mail is just only, you're going to see in some instances an increase in the use of mail because you're not going to be able to get the level of targeting with some of the digital tools now because of privacy concerns and, first party data and things like that. And so direct mail, we still have, the keys to the kingdom. We can still target people individually. When you asked about that bridge, one of the things, and this is maybe not a specific like technology answer as much as it's just an outlook on things. There's a couple of mail pieces that I've been doing and totally repeating for different candidates and campaigns for years because they're really successful. And one of those is I call it the word search, and it's a simple flat postcard, and we take a bunch of words we want a voter to associate with a candidate. Conservative, pro-life, pro-choice, liberal, whatever. And it works for both positives and negatives. If you want someone to associate a bunch of negatives with somebody, but you basically create like a little jumble. It's not as complex as a Wordle, but it's a jumble of letters, and then there's a list of words, and they have to find those words. And anytime you challenge people from like a puzzle standpoint, you're automatically going to increase engagement. Their recall, all of those things are going to go through the roof. In the absence of being able to put real human handwriting on every piece of mail, because that is 100% the best way to get people to recall, remember, and open your mail is human handwriting. But outside of that, the increased engagement I find when we use puzzles or Mad Lib type formats, anything where you can get people to, again, you're trying to get past that garbage can in the garage, you're going to dramatically increase the effectiveness of your advertising. And one of the ways to bridge that gap that we've used with a couple of my clients is we'll do this word search, and there'll be 10 words in the kind of jumble of letters, and we'll list 9 words, and we'll say there's a bonus secret word. And if you find it, you can email our campaign and tell us what you think it is. And if you get it right, we'll send you a t-shirt.
Oh, cool.
Or a sticker or something like that. And what you're doing is you're basically capturing an email address, right? You're getting people to respond, and depending on what your CPA is for whatever online campaign you're doing for email acquisition, it's just kind of one more tool in the toolbox.
Well, Chris, before we wrap up, I want to ask you, are there any challenges or opportunities in the political mail space or just politics generally that you'd like to see a startup or product addressed?
I did mention it earlier. If there was a commercial alternative to USPS, that was able to somehow get a faster delivery or a cheaper price point, I think that there is an opportunity for that. I don't know what the total industry numbers are for mail specifically, but the amount of money we spend on campaigns every cycle, whether it's 6 billion or 8 billion, however you want to do the math, it's not small. Now, having said that, the amount of money we spend comparatively to, say Budweiser and Sprint and things like that is still kind of paltry. That's whenever people complain to me that there's too much money in politics. I'm like, do you know how much money we spend on bottled water as a country? It's like $12 billion a year. So put it in context.
Yeah.
But
we spend more money on Halloween than we do on our elections.
Oh, hell, we spend more money on halftime snacks at the Super Bowl than we do electing the most important job in the world. And obviously I'm biased here, but the other thing I would say is, and we get this, it never fails. Every election cycle, somebody will call me last minute and be like, hey, what if we did a talking mail piece, it's like those, the greeting cards, you open it up and it plays a silly song, something like that. And all of those options are on the table. The problem is always just the lead time, instead of, it's going to take 2 days to print and then a day to prep and then mail, you're talking, okay, now it's going to take 2 weeks, to come up with a solution like that or something. If somebody was able to figure out a way to, make the ink on the paper more dynamic. I've done scented mail pieces before, where, you make it.
Oh, wow.
Do a mail piece and basically all they do is they mix in a little bit of scented oil with the ink when they're printing. And I would tell you, being in a print house when they're doing scented mail is torture, because, it's one thing for one mail piece when you scratch it and it smells like an apple, that's fine. But when there's 150,000 of them, it's a little overwhelming.
It stops smelling like apples.
Yeah. And so tactics like that can be effective, but it always comes down to the logistics. It may cost a couple extra pennies, to do a scented mail piece or something like that, but it ends up costing more time. And that's usually the commodity nobody has enough of. But anything, and I drilled down specifically on scented mail there, but like whether it's a hologram, lottery scratchers, any type of thing that makes that ink on paper a little more interesting, and they can bring the price point down to where campaigns can kind of wrap their minds around it. I absolutely think there's an opportunity for something like that. Somebody's going to figure this out sooner or later. We have all of these door-to-door apps, right? Whether it's Bridgetree, Sidekick, there's a bunch of commercial ones that are available, but these apps where you basically have a list, you're contacting voters by phone or door-to-door, and you're capturing user information, all that kind of stuff. Eventually, somebody's going to figure out the postcard option, right? Where it's Monday night and my name is Bob and I'm a volunteer and I'm calling Eric to tell him about my good friend Dave, who's running for Congress, blah, 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 blah. We have a conversation and, Eric, the voter, tells me he's really, really concerned about the rising prices of subscriptions on Netflix. Okay, great. Somebody's going to figure out a way to auto-generate and batch postcards that are directly from a volunteer or from a candidate or one or the other, that go as a direct follow-up mechanism, almost like imagine like an absentee chase program, except with volunteer contact.
Wow.
And I think when somebody is able to kind of figure that out, and again, it's not so much about the mail as much as it's the multiple points of contact, it's the personalization. And when you factor those things in, it just results in overall a much more impactful impression on the voter. So I think things like that are out there, and there's probably much smarter things than that I'm not thinking of, and I look forward to that innovation, because at the end of the day, I'm just trying to help people win campaigns. That's how I make the most money, and if there's some new tools in the toolbox, I'm all about using them.
I want to thank Chris Faulkner for joining us today. You'll find a link to Majority Strategy's website in the show notes, and you should definitely do yourself a favor and go follow Chris over on Twitter. Before we wrap up, a special word of thanks to everyone who has shared this podcast with friends or colleagues and rated us on Apple Podcasts. The audience is growing, which means Startup Caucus is reaching more people. So as always, if this episode made you a little bit smarter, share it with someone who should also hear it. We'll see you next time.